Star Wars Vintage Action Figures, a collecting guide for action figure resource. What we are looking at today is arguably the line that started the modern adult collector market in earnest. This occurred because of several crucial factors which all had to happen in a specific order and within a set time frame to have this transformative effect. 1. Lots and lots of figures sold between 1977 and 1985, constituting 8 years of furious popularity that peaked in 1980 and declined around 1984. 2. The average age of kids who first got their hands on the first line of figures was around 7 or 8. In consequence to this, the toys were immediately opened and the figures played with. This left millions of loose figures being played with, rubbed, dropped, loosened, lost in sandpits, or torn to shreds, with their accessories scattered to the four winds. 3. Jump forward a few years to the late 80s and early 90s, and all those kids were in their 20s. They had disposable incomes, and while the Star Wars trilogy were on VHS, the toys were no longer available in stores. They got a hankering for their old figures, but their mothers gave them away to jumble sales years ago, so they went on the hunt. It was pre-internet, so this meant combing through newspapers, attending collector conventions, and searching out specialist second-hand toy stores. And 4. The few adults who had bought Star Wars figures and vehicles and didn't open them, instead keeping them stored in good condition, at this stage saw their investments pay off massively, due to this dynamite combination of high demand, low supply, and specialized channels. At this stage, prior to McFarlane's Spawn line, action figures were simply marketed as toys. Adult collectors of Mego, Hot Wheels, G.I. Joe, Planet of the Apes and other toy lines had of course existed for decades, and collecting necessitated a lot of travel, which in turn drove up the prices to justify this extra effort. Value on these Star Wars figures and vehicles escalated wildly, spurred on by everyone's collective regret that they didn't keep their figures in mint-carded condition. In other words, their desirability and scarcity had a cumulative stacking effect. This doesn't really happen today. If a line sells well, then there will always be a lot of speculative collectors hoarding carded examples. If it doesn't sell well, or it is not widely available, then there isn't that universal appeal. Although the niche of fans will of course readily pay high prices for rare figures nonetheless. Also, thanks to the internet, you can now track down pretty much any figure you want in a wide variety of conditions and purchase it for delivery through safe channels. Back then, it was a treasure hunt. As a result, the secondary market for the vintage Star Wars line peaked in the late 90s, around the release of the special editions in theatres and in the run-up to the then feverishly anticipated Phantom Menace, after Hasbro released the first of the new figures, but before the ascendance of eBay. Despite the thousands of figures released since then, including multiple lines which directly play upon our nostalgia for the first ones, good condition, loose and carded examples of the original assortment still sell well. Condition can be the difference between mere pennies and dozens or even hundreds of pounds or dollars. But if you get to know the market, as with any collector-focused toy lines, you can get what you want from vintage Star Wars. There's far too much information to put in a single report, but we can give you the basics, what to look out for, some notes on condition, and the most sought after figures. The figures. As we understand it, there are 94 official carded original vintage figures, divided into 4 lines released over an 8-year period. Back in Christmas 1977, after half a year of Star Wars fever sweeping the globe, Kenner were under immense pressure to get toys on shelves, something that was impossible at the time as they were still going through manufacture and would not ship until early 78. Rather than miss this golden window of opportunity, empty boxes were sent out to stores with mail-in leaflets, valid for the first 4 figures: Luke, Chewie, R2 and Leia.
Star Wars figures. R2-D2. Chewbacca, Luke, and Princess Leia. They're the Star Wars Early Bird set of figures. These action figures are not yet available, but this Star Wars Early Bird certificate package is in stores. With this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of figures by mail. They'll be sent to you at home between February 1st and June 1st. The Star Wars Early Bird certificate package, new from Kenner.
These early bird sets were a risk that paid off big time. Kids were just happy with the mere promise of toys related to this movie they were going back to see again and again and again. In terms of variants, it's important to remember that most of these sprang up as a result of the restrictions of the manufacturing processes. Kenner was being given photographs and very basic information on many of the characters, especially prior to the release of the original Star Wars. Nobody knew how huge this was going to be, or how in demand the toys would be, nor how seriously fans and future writers would take the tertiary characters and lore, so mistakes and silly assumed names slipped through, hence Snaggletooth, Hammerhead, Walrus Man, rather than their later personalities of Zutton, Momo Nadon, and Ponda Baba. Luke, Vader, and Ben Kenobi all had early versions with a double telescoping lightsaber that was complex and expensive to produce. These will command a high price today, especially Ben and Darth, as the double telescoping Luke being part of the early bird set was produced in far higher numbers. Han Solo also had two head styles, the first of which looked a little too small, soft, and gentle, and is thus now rare. Snaggletooth here was developed like so many of the figures from a simple black and white photo given to Kenner. In this case it was cut off at the knees, so they assumed he was about the size of an average man rather than the little person who embodied him on film. As a result, their first version, which came with the Cantina playset, was oversized, blue, and wearing silver boots. Their corrected short red guy with furry feet of course fetches a lot less than this famous mistake. And finally, the first Jawa figure was issued with a vinyl cape, much like Vader and Ben Kenobi. However, Kenner realised soon enough that his short stature demanded a little more luxury to balance out his value, so all but the first Jawas had cloth capes. While there are plenty of reproductions all over eBay allowing folks to recreate this highly sought after Jawa variant, an original, especially in unbroken packaging, and even more so, sealed and approved by the AFA, could well fetch thousands of dollars. The original Star Wars line comprises 21 basic figures, from Luke Skywalker to Boba Fett. This last one began life as a now legendary mail-away figure with a missile-firing backpack, that ultimately hit the market without this feature for safety reasons, though rumours of a few prototypes slipped through. It's very possible that the popularity of Fett relative to his low screen time is related to how awesome this figure looked over the interim 2 years before The Empire Strikes Back came out. The fact that he looks and sounds cool, and he beat the rebels, thus cemented him in Star Wars history, and even his ignoble fate in Jedi couldn't erase that. The Empire Strikes Back, released in 1980, brought either 27 or 29 figures, depending on whether you consider C-3PO with removable limbs and R2-D2 with an extendable periscope feature to be new and distinct figures rather than variants of their 1977 originals. I do, so I'm saying 29. Luke in his Bespin fatigues has pale yellow hair for his first edition, while the second version is more sandy yellow, better matching Mark Hamill's colouring. This was repeated with the original Luke figure, and the Ben Kenobi had either white or grey hair. All the original Star Wars figures were re-released with Empire Strikes Back cards, 19 were reissued with Return of the Jedi cards, and 6 made it to the 4th line, which was called The Power of the Force. As for the Empire figures, 27 of them were reissued on Jedi cards, and 2, C-3PO and Yoda, were in The Power of the Force. This level of recarding figures and keeping every one available on shelves as long as possible maintained kids' ever-growing collections, and helped give even the most obscure characters a level of early geek cachet.
Big ass ship, huh, fellas? What'd you party monsters get up to this weekend? I caught one of my bandages in a freaking escalator at the mall, and it took maintenance an hour and a half to unjam that particular disaster. Those were some silly fellows, I kid you not. Haven't seen the cutie at the Dippin' Dots kiosk point and laugh with such cruel, forceful vigor since last month when the exact same thing happened. What'd you do, Iggy Pop? Okay. How about you, Busky Boss?
You'll never take me alive, bounty hunter!
Fighting the Frizzies at 11.